Welcome to Pub in the Desert, where we bring you honest, curious conversations about faith and the human experience. I'm Matthias Miller here with my co host, Kevin David Kridner. Before we dive in, I want to recap our three guiding principles. Number one, you don't need to be fixed, you need to be known. And we believe that love is knowing and being known. Second, we approach difficult topics with genuine curiosity. We aren't here to win arguments, but to understand. And third, we don't come with preset agendas. We let conversations unfold naturally, and we follow where authenticity leads us. And as you're going to find out today, if this is your first time, sometimes that's a wandering journey. So go ahead, pull up a chair, grab a drink, and let's explore what union looks like with God, with others, and with ourselves. So, Kevin, today I don't have this burning conversation starter in my mind. So I'm going to do what we've done periodically and just say, what's been stirring for you?
A few things, actually. As always, I never stop thinking about things throughout the week. Um, yeah, the first thing that comes to mind that I'm intrigued about and would like your input on is Jesus as the disturber of the peace. Let's just let's just dive in a really light one. I'll toss you a softball.
Well, there's two fascinating things with the timing of this. Number one, I recently there's a book. I'll have to grab the author name. I don't have it right in front of me that I picked up recently. But first of all, I think the question comes first of all. May come first to definitions, and the first definition is what peace, and what is the
Hmm,
peace that he's disturbing?
what a great question. So, as I periodically do, I was rewatching the Lord of the Rings movies because I kind of have to. In the second movie, there's this scene where Gandalf and Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli go into the hall of the King of Rohan, and the King of Rohan has had this guy Wormtongue, I think his name is, who's been whispering in his ear, and he's an agent of Saruman, the bad wizard, and he greets Gandalf. He says, "Oh, if it isn't Gandalf, the disturber of the peace," something along those lines, right? And to me, what he means is you're trying to disturb this plan we have in action, and we don't like that. And so, what peace is a great question. Is it can't we all just get along? Is it your particular peace, your worldview, your way the world should work? Or is there something greater that he's disturbing? It's a brilliant question. Which piece? So what would you say? Like Jesus, which piece is Jesus disturbing?
I mean, if we look historically, there's I think for those of us who in the world who love order and systems and ritual and all of those types of things, um, it brings sense to the chaos, and there's a sense in which the religious ceremonies of the day relied on that to bring a sense of felt peace. If we can all abide by these set of shared rules, ethos, whatever, we can experience that. If we can all appeal to a higher power of or a higher way of living in some capacity, it allows us to settle disputes with less effort. And so that was certainly a piece that Jesus came to interrupt. It's also interesting to think about this in the context of the 400 years of silence prior to his coming. Um, and it's kind of weird to think that it's weird to call that a peace, but there's a sense in which there was a peace in which there was no prophetic voice to disrupt how God's people were living. Um,
Right.
Now it's not actually true peace. Um, there's a lot of chaos there. I think we see we we see a lot of a reaction from the Roman government around the threat of the loss of peace, but a lot of that was not so much Jesus actually disrupting the peace as much as um, the Jews around him warning, taking his statements out of context and throwing it into a political light so that they could so that they could frame him as a political threat. Or that's how I would. He, very little of his teaching seemed, even though it confronted political thought, his arena seemed to focus much more around religious thought and the common people.
Right. Yeah, it was more human. It was more fundamental than that. Like you talk about Rome, and we all learned in school the idea of the Pax Romana, the peace brought about by Rome. And that was the peace at the edge of it, or at the tip of a sword. That was peace through force. And that's no peace. And then you look at Jesus's followers, many of them were so enthralled with the idea that, oh, the Messiah is here and he's going to free us from Rome. And using the world's way, using the Pax Romana way to free them. And he utterly refuses to engage in that type of behavior, that experience. There is no peace here. Those who live by the sword die by the sword. He even blesses the meek. They shall inherit the earth. And imagine how conflicting that would have to be to that culture at that time. And there's been all sorts of misunderstanding about what that word translated meek means.
Right?
But he has this way of communicating things that is so antithetical, that throws everything on its ear. That word meek essentially is a phrase. Somebody who has a sword, knows how to use it, but chooses to keep it sheathed. Or even the turn the other cheek. The whole dialectic around that is essentially treat me as a human being. You're not going to backhand me like a slave or a woman or a child. You're going to treat me as a human being. And so it's this dignity, this honor, this respect that how peace is achieved. And yet it requires us to endure suffering. And the Jews at that time would say, like, we've endured enough suffering. We've been under Rome for this long. We've had 400 years of silence. We've lived under the temple system. We've been bled dry. We don't want that peace. There and I think it really resonates with the state of our world right now. You have two sides who are fighting for power and control because they each know the right way. But it's all peace at the tip of a sword, which is no peace at all.
And if you have to kind of tie all those pieces together, find the thread that's running through it, it kind of is this peace that comes by keeping people under your thumb. And and to those who are doing that, there's this direct assault or confrontation of don't do that. Um, and to the people who are under that, there's this invitation for, I mean, there's this affirmation of value, of worth, of voice, of, um, so on the surface, it looks like peace, but really underneath the surface, it's nothing more than oppression. And so the question that naturally follows then is, how do you tell the difference between peace and oppression? Because obviously there is a there have to be shared traits for us to be able to confuse them. There's some sense of mm, absence of conflict is obviously not everything, but there's some sense of comfort.
Well, maybe that sense of comfort is very self-involved. It is very narcissistic. My world is ordered. I'm not experiencing any difficulty. It's peace. Maybe it becomes way too individual. Maybe it becomes way too me. I am not experiencing any trouble. I'm not oppressed. I'm not whatever moniker you want to put on it. So it's okay. It's not about we. Like the peace, the Pax Romana was not about we. If you were Roman, a certain type of Roman, you were good. If you were anybody else in those conquered territories, you weren't.
Mm.
And it's very evident in the teaching of the Sermon on the Mount, like specifically when he says, like, if somebody asks you to walk with them a mile, walk with them too. It's a very pointed political statement. The law was, if a Roman soldier asked you to carry their gear, you had to carry it for a mile, but you couldn't, they couldn't ask you to go further. And he's saying go over and above. Or somebody calls you into court and they want to take your cloak, well, give them your tunic as well. He's essentially saying stand naked in the court, make everybody see what this person is doing. To me, it seems like he's shining a light on narcissistic behavior, on me first behavior, on the me versus the we versus union.
And maybe this is a little bit like, so you talk about the shift from I to we. Um, maybe this is a little bit like uh, Chesterton. We've talked. I think we've talked about this in the podcast before. But Chesterton's concept of insanity being logic, but too small. And maybe the problem with peace, as we know it, or and this is basically a re-description of what you're saying, is there's a narcissistic piece, which is I am fine in my bubble.
Yeah,
But I don't want to get to know you and understand your situation because that's not going to be peaceful. You're not peaceful. It's not going to be peaceful. Let's not.
yeah.
Um,
Don't you dare mess with my bubble.
right. Um, oh goodness. Um, the, the, the coping mechanisms that people use to run from pain is wild.
The
My
coping
wife is
mechanisms we use.
think. I mean, I would never.
Me neither.
Uh,
I mean, but
I,
there are people out there listening, so
the hardest thing is seeing it for yourself, and it isn't part of the challenge for us in daily life is the willingness to be made uncomfortable, to make room for somebody else's lack of peace.
Right. Well, it struck me this last week, and maybe this is on topic, maybe it's not, but you can decide. Thinking about Jesus on the cross, and I was thinking about what he didn't say. What I and he had every right to say this, but he doesn't. He doesn't say, after all I've done for you, this is how you treat me. He
Yeah.
doesn't say that. Talk about we. Instead, he goes on to say, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. They're so wrapped up in their own self indulgent peacekeeping. They don't know what they're doing. It's fascinating to me. I was talking to a friend of mine, and he's very learned in medieval literature. And I
Fascinating.
brought that point. Yeah, I mean, he's a fascinating dude. He brought up that I brought up that point. And he goes, "Yeah, there was this liturgy that was written. I think he called it a liturgy, and I forget what the name of it is. A medieval liturgy that said something along the lines of, "You cried out for water in the desert, and I brought it forth from a rock, but you give me gall and vinegar."
Mm-hmm.
Like this mindset of things that Jesus could have said on the cross. But the fascinating thing to me was like, but he didn't say that. He
Yeah.
didn't say, after all I've done for you. He refused to be the I, because that's a very I statement. I deserve better treatment.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the key, the rights, the what I deserve. Maybe that gets really twisted. I put in the years, I've suffered, I've humbled myself, I've sacrificed, I've laid down. Now I get payment.
So I want to tease apart something here. Um, I want to first inject something. I was reading the book Holy Disruptor by Amy Ducker King, and she's the niece and cousin of the Duggar family, and it's a fascinating story, um, because you can see how the pain of the generational pain trickles down through the family, and how different parts of the family respond differently to the pain that they experience. And it gives a lot of compassion, I think. I'm only about halfway through the book. It's honest, it's sad, but it also introduces a lot of compassion for how does a family end up living like they do. um, and it gives a lot of context that was never really shared in front of bright lights and cameras. um, and so when you said the discomfort, Jesus bringing discomfort, um, her story is the story of learning to embrace the way of Jesus and recognizing that brings disruption in certain types of environments, and going past the label of being the crazy one to saying, maybe I'm not the crazy one, maybe I'm just called to live like Jesus does, and maybe that's uncomfortable sometimes. um, so that was what I first thought of when you were talking about that. um, I think one of the challenges with this that I personally face is, after having spent my whole life taking responsibility for everybody else, um, because that was my definition of we, and it's not how everybody, again, not how everybody experiences life. But then you come to this place where, how do you tease apart with wisdom the ability, the willingness to make your life uncomfortable for other people's challenge without becoming the savior of the world, which last time I checked, I'm not. But also without becoming, because it could be very easy to take that to an extreme and just become callous. Um, and there's a sense in which, after having absorbed so much emotion and pain from so many people, been like the buffer, all of the stuff, just punching bag, whatever it is, like taking all of it, helping bear the brunt of that. That it feels callous to say, um, to say that's really sad without going deep into that sad place with them. Um, how do you tease that the appropriate allotment of responsibilities without becoming cold, but also remaining open to. I don't know if my question makes sense.
That's that tension, right? Because in painful experiences, we as human beings have a tendency to harden ourselves in certain areas, close ourselves off, protect ourselves, to be the disturber of the peace, and to be open, kind, loving, caring. That's a tension. Maybe that's the narrow path. I mean, I know we've talked about the narrow path quite often, and like there's a lot of definitions, but what maybe it's a hallmark of the narrow path. Like you think about disturbers of the peace, John the Baptist, disturber of the peace, David, disturber of the peace, Peter and John, and all the disciples after the resurrection, disturbers of the peace, Jesus, a disturber of the peace, um, Martin Luther, disturber of the peace, Bonhoeffer, disturber of the peace, Gandhi, disturber of the peace, Martin Luther King. Like these are all disturbers of the peace. Somebody who was in the midst of a culture and said, "This isn't right." Like, what do their lives look like? Maybe that's a key in understanding and unpacking it, unraveling what that is. The prophets, the Old Testament prophets,
Right.
disturbers of the peace. What is maybe what does that look like? I think primarily what it means, or one of the aspects of what it means, is a very solitary life. You're not going to be loved by everybody, which strikes at the heart of our greatest human fear of being alone.
Yeah.
I was talking to a couple last night, and they're kind of have been walking this path for about a couple of years. And each one of them said within their families, within their church, within their friend group, they feel very, very alone. And my comment was like, I am something very, very holy happening. Maybe it's part of the process of like solitude is part of the outcome of it. I don't know. Maybe
And
that's how
maybe
we start to tease it apart.
maybe in that space in particular, part of the challenge of finding peace, maybe we've found. I've certainly experienced this. I found peace, what I thought was peace, in certain relationships, certain people's opinions, certain environments, and um, when God wanted to disentangle me from some of that dependency and false peace, it felt very extremely lonely. Um, and and but from my experience, what I've found is that there's a through the process of that, there was a subtleness and a contentedness with me and him that couldn't have come when it was filled with others. And I'm not saying like it's some kind of I've arrived in some capacity. It's just like there's I forget the passage. No, I mean there's the I've heard people talk about the desert about is it Hosea where he talks where God talks about calling her out to the desert so that he may speak tenderly to her. and talks about the desert being the place where God calls us to take away the other voices so that we can experience His love in more fully.
Yeah,
Maybe,
unadulterated,
unadult.
purely.
Yeah,
It's just you and me here. It's like the idea of a honeymoon, right? Like not the modern conception of what it is, but it's like, you know, go away, just the two of you, so you can experience that love purely unadulterated, away from family, away from friends, work, influences. We can start our life off this way. And to bring it back to the Lord of the Rings reference, Gandalf's response when he's called the disturber of the peace, one of my favorite lines ever in a movie. He says, "Keep your forked tongue behind your teeth." One of my favorite lines. I dream to be able to use that line at some point. Like the acknowledgement that there's something evil, there's something impure there that always does the accusing of disturber of the peace.
right.
Whether it's Herod towards John, who clearly sees him as the disturber of the peace, or the Pharisees and Sadducees complaining about that to Jesus, or Peter and John being dragged to the Sanhedrin and told not to do any of these things anymore. And they look at him and they go, well, whether I should follow what you say or what God says, you can decide, but I'm going to keep doing what he tells me to do.
Right.
Like that's a disturber of the peace. So, on a certain level, they seem very antisocial.
And then the question is it antisocial or is it? I mean, here's where my mind goes. It's also math. So, um, if you just the sheer fact of nobody cared about John the Baptist till he was out in the desert starting to preach. Nobody cared about Jesus until he started his public ministry. I mean, a little blips on the radar when he was in the temple, and who knows what else wasn't recorded about his life, but it was not a highly disruptive life. Well, it was a disruptive life, perhaps, in small numbers, and visibility and publicity and fame just simply become multipliers. So
Yeah,
if you're in a world in which if you have a relatively small world, then there's pros and cons. It's fascinating to me as a side note to hear people talk about pros and cons of fame. Uh, Joe Rogan mentioned on one of his podcasts that he actually appreciates fame because it creates a level of accountability for him in terms of am
right.
I actually living what I'm talking about? Um, but there's cons as well, which is like certainly levels like that, and you can't go anywhere meaningful without getting accosted by some measure. So if you imagine your life where in the small world that you have, and you're living Jesus in whatever capacity you know best to do, living out truth, and you find that it costs you some friendships, it costs you some comfort. There's some accusations made, rumors spread, all of the things that naturally happen with around this. Um, Imagine if that were multiplied. Like it may not be an accurate sample size, but it's a sample size of the world of how they respond to truth, how they respond to Jesus, how they respond to love, and and so from that sense, when you look at the loneliness and the isolation, it's like what's worse? Is it worse to be is it worse to be the unknown prophet that people don't discover until 100 years after your death, or maybe never, maybe
Yeah.
only recognized in heaven? Or is it worse to be the one that they all know and end up crucifying, assassinating, either in in reality or in character or in reputation.
Right. Yeah, what's better? Well, like there's a very human pattern to all of this, right? You look at all of these examples of disturbers of the peace, and in the beginning, they're just a pebble in the shoe, and you can deal with a pebble in your shoe. But then when you become the block that people stumble over, then you've got a problem. Then you have to be dealt with. My contention for the first 3 years of Jesus's ministry, he was a pebble in the shoe of the Pharisees and the ruling elites, whether it's Herod or whoever else. It doesn't get violent till the last week of his life, till he comes into contact with the Sadducees. And then it gets really violent. So there's some sort of transition that happens from being a pebble in the shoe and how people respond to a pebble in the shoe versus the stumbling block. At a certain point, a stumbling block is an obstacle and we keep tripping over it. We have to get rid of the stumbling block.
Because we need our peace back.
We need our peace back. And we're going to achieve our peace back by removing that stumbling block.
By whatever means necessary.
Whatever means necessary.
I mean, there's a point at which when the pain becomes so big, the cost doesn't matter anymore. Um, and usually that cost ends up being the cost of the pebble and the stumbling block. But um,
Well, in that immediate circumstance, yeah, the price to pay is how do I deal with that pebble or that stumbling block? Because when I remove that, then I become, then I'm peaceful, I'm set free. Ask Pilate or his wife what it's like to remove the stumbling block, how their life went after that.
what? Nah, that's fascinating. I mean, there's a reason for
I'm
stumbling.
really gonna I'm really gonna make a statement here, and I'm gonna piss a lot of people off with this. How is abortion any different? This is a pebble in my shoe, and I got to get rid of it. And you can give me all the justifications about what if it was incest or what if it was rape. That's a different situation we're talking about. But if you choose to end a life, to remove a pebble from the shoe, to remove a stumbling block to my life plan, you don't think there's a price to pay for that? Emotionally, spiritually, physically? I've walked with people who have made that decision. I can tell you there are consequences for that. A bill comes due, and it is not an easy thing.
When it's so rare, but and you can extend it even beyond just abortion. It's the I don't want to have kids because my career, my ministry, my I want to travel the world. I want to whatever the reason may be.
Mhm.
Um, and in the and there's and I'm not trying to make a statement about what's right for everybody, or I mean, there's a whole host of whatever. This is a nuanced topic, but senior loneliness becomes increasingly challenging when you don't have immediate family to fill those
Yeah.
relationships. Because increasingly, as you age, your peers are aging as well, and their kids are taken up with taking care of their aging parents. They're living their own lives. There's a just to be, this is a very rational left brain way to think about it, but there's a resource problem. Everybody else's resources are tied up in the middle of, rightly or wrongly, in the middle of living their lives, managing their own chaos, taking care of their own parents. Um,
Yeah.
Now, in an ideal world, there's enough room in there for the we, for us to look out for each other. But it is a very um, it, it's very easy to dispel pebbles without looking at the message that it was trying to communicate or what it was trying to build us into. And I think the question that's worth asking is, what is, I feel like it's very easy to look out there and to say, sorry, there's one more comment I want to make about kids. Kids are by definition inconvenient. Um,
Yeah.
and I think, but I think even beyond that, there's a host of ways where we can try to get the pebble out of the like for me in our season and stage of life, it's a fight to remain present and engaged. It just takes a lot of energy. Um,
Yeah.
it's very easy to be dismissive. It can be, and I think the perspective that you're sharing of looking at the long-term consequences of whether it's just being in anywhere from being dismissive um, or abortion, looking at the long-term consequences of getting rid of the pebble and the stumbling block, such a powerful perspective to keep in mind.
Well, I think Paul, I think it's in Philippians 2 or Philippians 4, somewhere there. He talks about Jesus emptying himself out. And when I see that, when I hear that, my mind immediately goes to being a parent. Like you are emptied out. I think as a teacher, working with children, you're emptied out. Like as a therapist, as a doctor, as like all of these different experiences, like it's an emptying out process. You're giving of yourself. And so I think these things are sacramental, by the definition that we used before, where it's a place where, that relationship between God and us has a very human, applicable, practical, experiential form right then and there. Marriage, having children, the death of a parent, all these things, they're very sacramental experiences where you're forced to recognize, well, you're not forced to, you're given the option to recognize that this is not all about me. And how we deal with that, how we engage with that emptying out is a very, very highly individual experience. And there are lessons there for all of us to learn.
So going to the emptying out analogy, maybe this goes back to the narrow way. There's the Jesus emptied himself out. He also disappeared from the crowds, spent time with the Father, ran away, hid by whatever means, put his phone on do not disturb, by whatever means necessary.
Airplane mode.
Airplane mode, exactly. Um, so, how deeply do I allow myself to be poured out? How do I allow myself to be refilled when I am being poured out? How do I grow my capacity for being poured out? Maybe that last question is actually the real question more than anything else, because The other ones end up being really centered around self-protection in some capacity. Um, so how do you grow that capacity?
I don't know how you do it aside from it actually just experiencing it and continually moving forward in that. I don't know how you do that aside from that. There's this philosopher, Wittgenstein, and probably one of the most famous philosophers of the 20th century. And he wrote his book and he felt like he had said all he needed to say. And he decided that he was there's two options. He was either gonna go become a monk or he was gonna be a elementary school teacher. He was done. Goes to the monastery and he's like, I'd like to be a monk. And they're like, you're not Catholic. And he goes, yeah, no, I'm not. And he goes, that's not how that works here. You have to be Catholic. Yeah. And he said, okay, I'll go to school teacher. So he goes to this schoolhouse in Austria and he teaches elementary kids. Like in like as I was reading about him and reading some of his quotes and his thoughts, he was like, I had gotten so wrapped up, or I had gotten so overwhelmed and done with the striving and the earning and the performing and the conversations that were all about strategy and like with adults. He's like, I just wanted to go be with children
Mm.
because there was this base experience of they were curious and they had all these questions. And he talks about one question this kid asked, something along the lines of like, where do our shadows go when we sleep? And he said that question like stuck with him for months. And not trying to figure it out analytically, but imaginatively, like walking this path of where your shadow goes when you're asleep. Like that kid had that thought. Where did that thought come from? They were curious about it, so they just said it out loud.
Which would make an awesome kids book, as a side note.
Right, right. The other day I had this student. She comes in and she um she walks up to me and she goes, I've got something to say when everybody gets into the classroom. I'm like, okay, great. Everybody gets in. She comes up to the front and she says, I'm going to say this here because my parents can't say it. It said I can't say it at the wedding that I'm going to this afternoon. And I'm like, oh, please tell me more. So hilarious. She goes, I object to this. And I object to this wedding because the lady my cousin is marrying isn't a Christian and she isn't nice and she doesn't smile. And it started this conversation in the class. These are 13, 14-year olds, you know? And it starts this conversation in this class about, oh, I've had this experience and I've had this experience. And they're all just sharing and they're all just curious. And it was like this tornado of conversation that had started that I kind of just stepped back and like observed. And the curiosity in that room of what it means to be in a relationship, to be married, to be emptied out, all these kinds of things. They're talking about all these things, but from their perspective. And it was probably the best class we've had all year long.
That's powerful.
It was so powerful. And like that experience, like that was for me, the power was in the curiosity and the freeness with which they spoke. And like it just kept resonating in my mind of like, unless you're like one of these little ones, you have no part in the kingdom of heaven. And like to see, like to me, going back into the classroom in that moment, it struck me like this is why I came back because I needed to see the light. I needed to see the curiosity. I needed to be around them.
Yeah.
And it was just such a powerful moment, a sacramental moment.
That's really fascinating. What better way for these kids to start wrapping their heads around what they want their relationships to look like than to have
And
conversations
by the way, this was in a physical science class.
That's, see, I'm just mad you weren't one of my teachers. Um,
I was just like, hey, we're going there. Okay. Path laid out. Let's go.
uh, wow.
So maybe
So
that's
I still have this question. Oh,
so
okay, I want to make an observation off of that. One of the observations is, first of all, that I think we all do well. Like life needs balance and counterbalance, tension and countertension, and there's something that you gain through the chaos and curiosity of kids that you it lends a quality to your life that you may not always recognize. And I think part of what you've done, well, one of the things you do exceptionally well is creating space for those conversations to happen, for them to have those conversations. Um, and so one of the questions out of that is, man, it's like the cares, the responsibilities, the challenges of life can drive the curiosity and the playfulness out of us. And so how do you create, so even pragmatically, that's for people working with kids in any capacity, how do you create environments for these to happen? Or is it, and maybe it's less about, I'm not giving you room to answer this question, but maybe it's less about, it's more about spotting the opportunities for this to happen when it wants to emerge and creating space for it and not shutting it down. Is that fair?
think that's fair. I think that's fair. And at least for me, it's about priorities. What is my priority in this?
But by the way, your audio source switched a couple minutes ago. I don't, and you're quieter now.
Oh, okay. I think my headphones died. Let me switch out real quick.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, how about now?
Perfect. That's much better.
Okay. I think it's to go back to what I was saying. I think it's about priorities. Like, what do I prioritize in this moment? Am I prioritized by the standards and the objectives and what people say they should be learning at this stage and this point, and we have to get through all the material and that kind of thing? Because that will lead me to be a slave driver. Or is this about the development of these kids, of their curiosity, of their courage, of their ability to ask questions and to be heard and be listened to and be understood? And not even in the classroom, but anywhere. Like, I want that to be my priority. So is there an urgency to get to a goal, or is there a journey that's happening that we're becoming something as we journey?
So okay, but implicit in your statement, you're saying that the education system as it's set up now is at odds to their individual development.
Of course, without a doubt, hands down. And anybody who's rational, who's actually looked at the system, knows that. And I would even question compulsory education. Like, the whole idea of compulsory education was to have an educated populace so they could make decisions for the country. They could vote properly.
Sure.
And let's look at history. Do we have an educated populace?
Well, I mean, fair question. We touched on this last time. Yes, we do, but not through the education system. They're getting educated elsewhere.
Right, right, right. And so you're fighting this uphill battle of education, and your value is on the mind, as it has been since the Enlightenment. Human understanding was the key to peace, the key to bringing about a just society and peace and joy. It promised Eden.
Mhm.
Have you ever looked at journals or books written about World War I, World War II, what people experienced? These from this enlightened society, we have these types of things. The Holocaust, genocides in Rwanda, all these things. Like, we're an enlightened society. Really? Your education hasn't worked. Like, a colleague of mine likes to say this, and she says it tongue in cheek, but she's actually said it directly to me a few times. She'll look at me at a certain point, she'll go, your way sucks. You should try another. And it's this light bulb moment where you're like, oh, wow. All these pieces that I've put in place, all this path that I've walked has brought me to this place. And I have to acknowledge all these pieces have brought me here. Is this what I want? No? Okay, it sucks. Let's try a different way.
That's that's the discomfort. That's it. That's discomfort.
Yeah, that's a shock to the ego, strangely enough.
So have there been instances in the past where humanity's done education well, in your opinion? What does doing education well look like?
I think it has to come from relationship, first and foremost. And I think church is the same way. Like, we have a system or a model, and in classrooms as well, where we have somebody stand up in front and we have somebody lecture, and then we have the people taking notes in the audience, and we expect that that's what education looks like. And then we provide these tests that supposedly tell us whether they've mastered this topic or not. There's very little relationship. The best teachers, whether it's in a church setting or a school setting, in my opinion, are those who have a relationship with their students. And so I think the Jewish model of the rabbi and the disciple is a very, very powerful example. The apprentice, the 7-year apprentice and the master, like, that's a very, very powerful principle. I think that that's how it should be.
So what is your opinion on like a certain set of baseline knowledge, exposure, or maybe it's not knowledge, maybe it's exposure. There's an incredible amount of value for kids to be exposed to a wide variety of things, um, because you can, for all the I've got friends, colleagues, mentors who've been big proponents of the 80/20 principle. But the 80/20 principle, which says that 80% of the benefit of any benefit or outcome leads, it only stems from about 20% of inputs, and then 64% from 4% if you want to drill down even deeper. But but for that to actually work, there has to be a broad enough base of broad enough base to be meaningful. So
Mm-hmm.
in a financial sense, 80/20 of a dollar doesn't mean much. 80/20 of 10,000 looks different. 100,000, a million, a billion, whatever the number is. Same with our experiences. We derive happiness from a very, or fulfillment, and are really, I think, exceptionally, for some reason, between interest, proclivity, experience, whatever the factors may be, there's a very small segment of skill set in the world at which we are incredibly talented in and can outperform 99% of the world or more, um,
Mm-hmm.
for whatever reason. But you can only get there if you have a big enough data set, a big enough base of experience, a broad enough exposure to the world. And
Hmm.
it's almost like, I mean, I think if there's any regret that I have of my, I would say by many people's standards, I had a fairly broad range of experiences in my 20s. Um, but I wish in retrospect I would have broadened even further my, especially my career experiences.
Yeah.
Really explored a lot more opportunities, because I think if I could have if I could have expanded, if I could have had 5 to 10 years of just broad exploration across a wide variety of experiences, and narrowed in a focus much earlier that suited me much better, just from a
Hmm.
from a lot of different factors, financially, personal fulfillment, lack of stress, personal well-being, all of those things, it would have yielded benefit to me. um,
Hmm.
so in the education system, there's a little bit of a, here's a fire hose. um, like, you should have exposure to all of these different things, but we marry that with this expectation that you should actually master all of the things as well. So how do you view, is there a baseline set of, or, I don't know, like, just what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, as you were talking, what kind of struck me is, again, in broken record, but it comes back to the we versus me. Like, if we are educating for us to increase the experience of union, of connection, of growing, of learning, then you're all good, and everybody's going to be at their different level. But those who have knowledge in a certain area are going to share it with others who don't, and there's this we that happens. But in a me society, in an I society, it's all based on competition. And so I'm not going to reach down and lift somebody up, because that person I lift up could potentially become the one who takes away my stuff. And that's what we have developed in the school system, is an I. I was talking to a buddy who teaches at MIT, and he was talking about the horrific psychological issues that go on there. The most competitive university, technical university in the world, essentially. And he's like, it is Lord of the Flies there. You see people acting like animals, essentially, from their base desires. This is mine and I have to have it, and I'll do anything to get it. Do you I don't know if this is publicized or not, but like the rate of suicide at MIT is astronomical.
Hmm.
Malcolm Gladwell talks about this. He talks about big fish in a small pond, small fish in a big pond. You take these kids who are big fish in their small pond, their local high school, whatever, and they go to a place like Harvard, and they just collapse under the weight. Whereas if they went to, he uses an example like the University of Maryland, if they went there in this specific program, where they would have been class rank versus going to Harvard. And how does that affect the rest of their life? Well, the confidence building at the University of Maryland and being, higher class rank and that kind of stuff actually leads them to careers where they are, by all measures, very successful. And it's this competitive dog eat dog. Like, it's not we, it's I, and I have to make a name for myself, and I have to provide, and all those kinds of things. And you're just like, it chews people up and spits them out.
When I have to make my experience worth it, I have to produce a return on the investment of capital and time and all the things. um,
Right.
that's wild. And so this sense of which, okay, now, and this lends to a fascinating trail here, which is, there's a sense in which we're harming our kids, maybe beyond a sense, but I want to hear your thoughts. Here's what you, okay, so that's what it looks like for in the Ivy League. But
Mhm,
what about elementary? What about the kid
mhm,
who isn't good at, pick a subject, math,
mhm,
and struggling to pass?
mhm.
What impact does that have? Is
Which
that
is so fascinating because math by its very nature is a developmental process. So we have parents who are pushing their kids ahead of where they're developmentally ready and then putting the pressure on them to stand out, to achieve, to be the star, to all that kind of thing, and then shaming them if they're not, when it's all a very developmental process. Like there's a local private high school here that my nieces and nephews went to, and a few years ago, I think this was pre-COVID, they were having just a rash of depression and anxiety were just becoming overwhelming, and they started to look at it, and it's a college prep academy. They tout it on their website that, this percentage goes Ivy League, this percentage goes top 5% school, da da da, all that kind of stuff. And then they're having depression and anxiety, suicide attempts, all this kind of stuff from high school kids.
wow?
So their fix for this was we're going to start school later because they need to be able to get their sleep. They need to be able to get their breakfast. They need to wake up, all that kind of stuff. That was their fix. Really, that's the problem.
I
And it's mind numbing. At that point, your child is nothing more than a commodity.
right.
It's being bought and sold based on the value that somebody else perceives in them.
Based on what's trending in the market. Well, really, what's trending in the market, you know, 5 years from now, or 5 to or whatever, 4 to 8 years from now.
Yeah, yeah. And we treat these kids as commodities.
So,
Bottom line.
is there evidence, or has research been done that pragmatically, functionally, practically, kids are more likely to succeed, do better in the real world when you place them at the proper developmental level, when you allow them to be in places where they succeed, and if so, well, okay, let's there's that, and what are those that you've come across?
Research study after research study tells the same story over and over and over again. The well-adjusted, balanced kid comes from a environment where there are two parents in the home, supportive, encouraging, curious, courageous. Like these are what needs to happen for a child to be well adjusted and successful. And the measure of success obviously varies, um, depending on the marker, the target you're aiming for. But like the idea of you would just want to take emotional health. The emotional healthy adult comes from an environment where they have that stable foundation, and it's all about we love you as you are, and we're going to walk with you as you develop. And that takes different rates for every human being because we're all individuals, and that's just what it looks like.
Yep.
I mean, and there's truckloads of data on that topic, and yet we don't care because the I takes over because that child is a reflection of me, and if that child isn't successful, then what does that mean about me? Doesn't matter what it means about you. That's a child of God made in His image, given gifts and talents that it's your job to foster and to steward well. Doesn't matter how it affects you.
If I can just, I mean, this is just re-emphasize. It's like the knowing and the being known, the we is the most fundamental foundational, outcome altering thing that you can do.
Mhm.
In just a little rabbit trail, but in business, people who have an incredibly difficult time making the right decision, it's almost, it's, you can run all the numbers, you can do everything, and
Mhm.
have the facts staring people straight in the face, and have a clearly delineated plan where if you would just execute, just go, like, this is the facts, go do this,
Do
and
this thing.
do this thing. And if they would do this thing, they have an extraordinarily high probability of success with that thing. They will still
Yeah.
not do it
No.
for this very reason, for some
Yeah.
kind of reason that's buried in the I and the we and the knowing and the not know and the not being known. And and we see this in parenting, we see this in education.
Yeah. Yeah.
So so then it becomes of utmost importance. Well, okay, so I have another question then. Did you just get lucky with the school that you're teaching for? Because it seems to me like your attitude towards teaching could be a pebble in the shoe of some forms of administration.
Oh, it is. It is. Even like, yes, it is. God led me here, and it's been a wonderful experience. But there is a pebble in a shoe aspect to it. There has been, and there will be conversations in the future. We think you should do this way. Okay, I'm listening to you. Help me understand the direction where you want to go, and I'll ask all sorts of questions about it. But at the end of the day, there's irreducible complexity. When we get to the fundamental unit of it, when we get down to I, we, knowing and being known, love, those kind of things, I will not budge on that. And so you either accept that that's where I'm at, and if this isn't a good fit, then it's not a good fit, or we work together to bring this about.
Right? That makes sense.
On that note, I just remembered I've got a meeting at 8. I've got to run.
All right. Well, that's fun
Speaking
times.
of school meetings,
Speaking of school
this one's
meeting,
going to be about AI.
this
So
one's about AI. Well, this sounds fun. I would love to
yeah,
be part
I'll be
of
able to tell
it.
you guys about that next week.
Exactly. That's awesome. Well, we're going to call it a wrap. We're not even going to try to find the thread. This is absolutely fascinating, I think, Kevin, to dig into education, growth, development of kids. And it's a topic I think I would love to continue digging into more because it lends into so much of life, understanding ourselves, understanding how we show up as parents. There's just a lot there. Parents, grandparents, whatever season of life that we're in. So there's a lot there. Kevin, always a pleasure, and
To be continued.
to be continued. Don't be late for the meeting.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
exactly. And all of you guys, thanks for listening. Um, and we always love hearing feedback from you guys. So we welcome that. And until next time.
Next time.